Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we turn our attention to Belarus, the authoritarian-run state that often feel like Russia's ever-obedient understudy waiting backstage in a cheap costume, hoping to deliver one good line that makes the headliners proud. Now this week, that cheap costume just got a little more intimidating. And that's because Vladimir Putin signed a treaty offering security guarantees to Belarus, including the potential use of Russian nuclear weapons. Belarus may now be living under the Russian nuclear umbrella, and all I can say is, well, that's one hell of an umbrella. The kind that makes you wonder if you should have just stayed inside. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
This is the Oreshnik missile. It is a hypersonic nuclear-capable missile developed by Russia. This new weapon was used on the Ukrainian city of Dnipro just a few weeks ago. The Russians have boasted about its hypersonic capabilities, claiming the missiles cannot be intercepted. Now the Russian president wants to install them in Belarus, at the request of Alexander Lukashenko. They even have a timeline for this.
This will become possible, I think, in the second half of next year, as the serial production of these systems in Russia increases.
Threatening adversaries with pointy, or not, rockets is one of Putin's favorite pastimes. But is the Oreshnik truly any different from all the ICBMs and other scary-sounding multiple-letter abbreviation missiles Moscow has at its disposal?
He's had to use it, and then he had to do a press conference, and then he had to do a second press conference to say, hey, this thing is really scary.
Over the last few years, Russia and Belarus have been working very closely together when it comes to nuclear drills. This friendship blossomed especially after the former decided to invade Ukraine in 2022. The decision for Belarus to host the Oreshnik is just the latest in a series of measures both nations have undertaken, which have increased their military dependency on one another. This trend is, in some observers' eyes, quite worrying for Belarus's political future.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Now this move follows Putin's visit to Minsk and the publication of a revised Russian nuclear doctrine that explicitly covers Belarus. Basically, Russia's message to Belarus is, don't worry, we've got your back, especially if your back were to be obliterated by Western artillery. It's the geopolitical version of a big brother offering to protect you from the neighborhood bully, but also making sure everyone knows that he can borrow your lunch money along with your entire lunch or whatever he wants. Now for the West is yet another ominous development, a gentle reminder of some leaders' grand ambitions. Putin and Lukashenko stood side by side, radiating the warm camaraderie of two men who have clearly gone drunk off their usual fear and intimidation cocktail. Putin emphasized that the new treaty ensures security for both Russia and Belarus. Lukashenko never one to miss a chance to impress Daddy Russia, asked Putin to deploy more advanced weapons in Belarus, including the newly revealed Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile. Now, Oreshnik might sound like a delightful pastry you would enjoy with tea, but this missile is no croissant. It is the ballistic equivalent of a sledgehammer. To be clear, these aren't adorable missiles with cartoonish warheads. The Oreshnik is a missile system that Russia claims can fly at 10 times the speed of sound, making it reportedly unstoppable by current air defenses. It's like the world's most horrifying game of tag where you're always it, and the missile is that super fast kid who insists on wearing cleats in gym class. Putin noted that these missiles could be deployed to Belarus by the second half of next year, and while they remain under Russian control, Belarus can't help pick the targets, as if choosing targets was a casual lunchtime activity. Pass the salt, dear, and while you're at it, could you recommend a European city for a theoretical thermonuclear meltdown? It's like having a landlord who's not only refusing to fix your leaking pipes, but also expects you to pick which neighbor's house that he should burn down next. Even if Belarus doesn't literally hit the launch button, the psychological aspect is colossal. So as we are left watching this grim spectacle, we can only hope that cooler heads prevail. Though judging by recent events, cooler heads are in short supply. After all, when your local strongman shows up with brand new ballistic missiles, cool isn't the first adjective that leaps to mind. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Anatol Koto, Belarusian Democratic Forces Forum. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Oh, nice to see you.
So we have officially seen Putin trying to put nukes in Belarus now. Do you think this is something that's more practical, or is it more for messaging?
As for now, it's more about messaging, and it's not only about nukes, but also about so-called new weapon, which is not nuke. And actually, the experts say that it's not new, it's about Oreshnik. It's about frightening Europe that Putin still has some power, but all these messages are being right now overturned in Syria, when Russian weapon and also Russian troops didn't manage to save Assad's regime.
Right. There's also a line of thinking that, well, people in the West are really increasingly not taking these threats as seriously as Putin wanted to be. Is there another possibility that these are also for more internal propaganda, internal messaging reasons?
I guess it's more about his personal relationship with Lukashenko, because Lukashenko, during this summit, tried to solve several issues with Putin and with Russia. It's more about money, or it's about public support of one more re-election of Lukashenko. And Lukashenko didn't receive anything from Putin except this Oreshnik in upcoming future. So this means that Putin tries to keep Lukashenko as I would say dependent as possible on Russia, not giving him real money, not giving him even some sort of PR or public support, but trying to engage him in Russian warfare, in Russian war games, and war threats against Ukraine and against Europe.
So this paints a very interesting picture between Putin and Lukashenko. Usually in the West, we tend to look at them as buddies, kind of partners in crime. But I think it does show that it's more of a puppeteer and a puppet kind of situation with Putin essentially pulling the strings of Lukashenko.
It's not about partnership relationship. It's more about trying to keep Lukashenko as a puppet. Of course, Lukashenko was constantly, for many years, even for decades, he succeeded in playing some sort of autonomy. So he tries to keep some distance from Russia and Putin, not being totally I would say controlled by Moscow, but year by year this game is getting closer to its end, and of course during the last summit we showed we've been witnessing the clear evidence that this game is really is one step or even half of the step before the end, because Lukashenko, for the first time in history, didn't receive so-called Christmas presents from Putin.
Because you mentioned that, well, this is the first time that Lukashenko didn't receive any Christmas present from Putin. Do you think that's going to change the election outcome in the next presidential election, or at least shift the dynamics within Belarus a little bit?
To show that he is a defender of the country, and the only way to make it real, I would say, is getting back to the to his practices, to his most bloody practices from the past. So he will try to threat the population. So I guess some sort of terroristic acts are quite possible in the upcoming future before the elections and during the election day itself. to take part in any mass events before the elections, and it's better not to participate in the elections so during the election day.
So you mentioned earlier that Putin has essentially pulled out some of his support for Lukashenko. Do you think that's going to affect some of his electoral prospect going into the next election?
I guess this would affect the Lukashenko's behavior or Lukashenko's tactics in upcoming so-called elections, because without people inside the country, without Russia's support, especially financial and PR support, Lukashenko will try to get back to the practices he utilized during some of his past political crises. I'm speaking about threatening the society because, for example, in 2011, he organized the terroristic acts in Minsk subway in order to consolidate the society and turn the attention from the political and economic crisis inside the country into some sort of support of the regime in facing the terroristic attacks, and he managed to do this that time. So I guess this is the only one instrument he has at his hand right now, and he for sure will utilize this bloody method during his upcoming elections, which has only 1.5 months to go.
All right, and going back to these weapons stationed in Belarus, I'm also wondering, with the threat of the use of these missiles, is it also for more domestic consumption, or is that also a message being sent to the West?
I guess it's more about Lukashenko himself, because because the West could not be frightened with this Oreshnik or some. Also, during Ukraine campaign and during the Syrian situation is which is taken seriously into account Russian threats. So Lukashenko tried to pull Putin into some more dependence because he is counting that alongside with the missiles, there will be some sort of financial support to cover the cost of these new military bases, these expenditures for the military personnel and other things which Lukashenko will try to utilize to at least to cover the budgetary deficit this year and the upcoming year. But in fact, Lukashenko himself has fallen into more dependence from Russia, because even for now, Putin did not give these new weapons, just some words to give it in some sort of upcoming future.
Right, so it does seem like the Kremlin wants it both ways. It wants to threaten or at least send some message to the West that this whole Belarusian nuclear umbrella with the weapons station being there is a threat, but they don't really want to carry out some of these moves. What's your take on that?
I share your opinion on that. I think that they are not crazy enough to utilize these threats. So it's more about only threatening by the words and some actions, because everybody, both in Russia and Belarus, is confident and actually is aware, at least, that the response will be devastating for both countries themselves should they only try to press the red button.
Right. So that's a very interesting situation right there. But do you think that this move might take away Belarus, or to some extent Lukashenko's autonomy from the country even farther?
That's true, because both nuclear weapons, which is possibly right now on the territory of Belarus, and both this mythological Oreshnik will be controlled by Russian military. They will be controlled from Kremlin, and this means that Lukashenko gets nothing, but only possible attack or preventive actions from the Western side if West realizes or recognizes this threat is real.
Right, so it does seem like it's slowly turning into a glorified launch pad for the Kremlin. Very interesting situation there. In the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thanks.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East I don't want to miss. President Volodymyr Zelensky has issued a rare update on Ukrainian military casualties in the ongoing war. He revealed that approximately 43,000 Ukrainian soldiers have lost their lives in the conflict.
Ukrainian authorities are rarely this forthcoming when it comes to the losses their country has suffered in the war. In addition to the more than 40,000 dead soldiers, Kyiv also mentions 370,000 injuries, bringing the total number of casualties to over 400,000. But Ukrainians aren't the only ones paying the price. The war is taking a heavy toll on the Russian forces directly responsible for this tragedy. President Zelensky says nearly 200,000 Russian soldiers have been killed since the start of the war, a number eerily close to that of the initial invasion force deployed by Moscow in February 2022. Ukraine also says that 550,000 Russian soldiers have been wounded. While Western media say they cannot verify these figures, they still serve as a bleak reminder of the bloody toll exacted by war.
In economic news, Ukraine's growth is projected to reach a robust 4% this year. However, forecasts for 2025 indicate an economic slowdown, largely due to labor shortages.
Over the course of its invasion, Russia has been determined to cripple not just Ukraine's military, but also its infrastructure and its economy. Despite all of these attacks, the Ukrainian economy has persevered through this period of incredible hardship. While a 4% growth rate would be considered good in ordinary circumstances, in context of the war, it is even more impressive. Trade through the Black Sea has been one of the main ways in which Ukraine's economy has managed to stay afloat. Though high public spending and household incomes benefiting from real wage growth have also helped. While this growth rate is seen as a positive, the country's overall GDP is still 22% below its pre-war level. There has been some recovery, but the Ukrainian economy is far from full stabilization. A possible ceasefire could greatly help improve the economy's condition, experts say, especially since labor and energy shortages are expected to lead to a slowdown next year.
In a historic development, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have signed an agreement resolving their shared border disputes after 33 years. This border, the last unresolved one in Central Asia, has been a flashpoint for violence in recent years.
The most severe clashes on the Tajik-Kyrgyz border took place in 2021 and 2022. In their wake, the two countries' governments took the matter of resolving the border's shape once and for all very seriously. After months and months of heavy negotiations, a description of the border has been reached by both sides. The next steps include drawing up final documents and those being ratified by the parliaments. The real work, however, is yet to come, as the border will actually have to be implemented, and smaller disputes which may not be clear now will come to light. This latest development is a massive diplomatic achievement, which could lead to more than just more political stability in the region. It could lead to the people living on the border finally finding some semblance of peace and safety after decades of strife.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has fled the country and sought asylum in Russia. Meanwhile, the HTS rebel group has seized control of Damascus, signaling a potential end to the protracted Syrian civil war.
Not many expected what could be an incredibly sudden end to a war which has been ongoing since 2011. With the rebels taking over the capital of Damascus and routing Bashar al-Assad, the way seems to be clear for them to bring about the promised better future for the Syrian people. But before that future can be reached for, there is much rebuilding to be done. The war has laid waste to Syria's landscape, physically, politically, and socially. The country will also bear these scars for generations to come. Many Western states, such as the US and the UK, have hailed the collapse of the al-Assad regime and have shared some optimism about Syria's future. But no one has shown more joy than the millions of displaced Syrians, both those who have been forced to flee within the country, as well as those who have formed diasporas abroad. For many of them, this is a chance to finally return home after more than a decade.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to DVB World.